Welcome back to Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. I'm personal financial planner, columnist, and financial therapist Rick Kahler. Research tells us that 90% of all financial decisions are made emotionally, not logically. For nearly 4 decades, I've been helping people make better money decisions. So what makes my financial worldview different from most financial experts? I blend the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Good money decisions are not just about the money. So let's get started with today's episode. Welcome back to another edition. Today I'm going to talk about something I've never talked about before. I even just Googled it through the 160-something episodes that I've done, and it didn't show up. So, let's start with this. What if you are just madly in love, hopelessly in love? You have found the partner of your dream. And you both are relatively young. You wouldn't have to be, but traditionally you're younger, and traditionally being younger, you don't have a lot of assets, really, if any. And then somebody asked you, as you're talking about marriage, maybe you become engaged, are you planning to get a prenup? Now, you might stare at them like just stunned in disbelief and say something like, dude, did I really just hear you ask if we're going to have a prenup? We don't have anything to split up. And even more important than that, who wants to plan for a breakup? We are in love. We hear that divorce happens to other people, but it's not going to happen to us. And if you are that unsure of your marriage partner that you've got to plan for a divorce before you're even married, well, maybe you shouldn't be getting married in the first place. We clearly don't need a prenuptial agreement. I've had a lot of conversations that have gone that way. But what if you do? What if you do need a prenuptial agreement, even if you don't have 2 pennies to rub together? What possible reason would there be for you and your partner to have a prenup? So that's what I'm going to explore today. So first, before we go further into that, let's really be clear as to what a prenup is. Many of you know exactly what I'm talking about, and many of you may never have heard the term. Prenup is short for a prenuptial agreement. A prenup is a written contract. It's a legal document that's signed by 2 people before they get married. And in the agreement, it outlines just a lot of things, but basically anything that has to do with money. So it can, as I have said before, you do the divorce before you get married, which means you agree to how you would divide your assets. This would be important if you come into the marriage with some assets, but it doesn't have to be important. How are you going to agree to divide debt? Maybe both of you are coming into the marriage with equal debt. Maybe one partner has a lot more debt than another. How about the financial responsibilities in the event of a divorce or legal separation? How are you going to treat incomes, especially if one doesn't have an income or the incomes are not equal? How will you handle that if there's children with the marriage? So prenup is a game plan where the couple is going to agree to certain outcomes in the quote, air quotes, unlikely event that the marriage fails. Now, I'm guessing some of you are saying, well, logically speaking, there's around a 50-50 chance that a marriage fails or succeeds. And so maybe this makes perfect sense. I don't know. I don't think, especially with a first-time marriage, it ever makes perfect sense. And I know I said ever, and certainly there are those where it made perfect sense, and they got one. But typically, prenups are thought to be the exclusive territory of older couples that have wealth, that have children from previous marriages that are obviously divorced and they find someone new, and the idea of a prenup is brought up. That's a little more common, and certainly in those cases the need for a prenup is pretty clear, or makes a lot of sense, has a lot of logic behind it, because couples who have been through a breakup of a marriage can painfully understand that no matter how a marriage made in heaven can implode, that there can be disastrous financial implications that will often happen. And pain, financial trauma, if you will, that can stick with the individual for a long, long time. And I think that the biggest reason for a prenup on a second marriage is to assure that children from a first marriage will receive their fair share, and I'm putting that in air quotes, of the assets that were brought into the second marriage. Typically, it's a reasonable understanding amongst second marriages that what one has, will ultimately go to their children, and what the other has will ultimately go to their children. And there's a lot of nuances, a lot of financial planning that happens with this, because it is not uncommon that spouses will leave what they have in trust to the other partner to make sure that if they need sustenance or support after the passing of the first, that they'll be able to find that support. And if they don't need financial support, that the proceeds of those trusts will go to the first decedent's children upon the second spouse dying. Sorry, I used that legal word, decedent. That's the person who dies. So that's often the use of a prenup in a second marriage. Again, older couple with children from previous marriages. And that may not be the need after 10 years of marriage, but it could be the need immediately. Prenups, like anything, can be changed. So it's just like in planning for a will. What do you want to happen today if that were to happen? So, given that this is the number one scenario that people think of, it's understandable that this scenario can lead to a lot of people believing that prenups aren't necessary for couples with minimal finances. However, even without significant assets, prenups can offer some really valuable benefits for couples of all income levels. So here are a few reasons why a couple that individually don't have a lot of assets, aren't bringing a lot of assets into the marriage, may still be well advised to explore a prenup. And consider this. I frame that as consider exploring a prenup, raising the prospect of simply exploring whether a prenup is necessary for you and your partner can have one huge, very valuable outcome. It will open a discussion regarding personal finances and attitudes about money. Just the mention of it, and not simply the mention, but it's exploring, it's putting into action, doing everything that needs to be done to determine if a prenup is advisable. And this means full disclosure. This means undressing financially in front of your partner, which can actually have a lot more issues tied to it than undressing physically. It's just shocking to me how few couples really have an open, transparent, and honest money discussion, or money discussions, as is probably more the case, prior to marriage. It's one of those things that there might be a few things said like, okay, are we going to move into the same home, or what do you do for an occupation? Maybe not even tied to how much do you make, and that is considered to be the money discussion. That is a money avoidant discussion. I'm talking about digging deep, full transparency. And I found in doing some research for this podcast, I found some information, a study revealed by NerdWallet, September 19th, 2023. The headline said 54% of engaged Americans disagree with partner on financial goals. Now that's a majority. And their findings said this, that 3 in 5 married Americans, which is about 60%, say they are that they're really reticent to discuss things financially with their partner, and there's financial topics that they didn't discuss before marriage that they wished they had, 60%. And again, 54% say that it's difficult to have a serious financial conversation with their spouse. And that was somebody they're married to, not their fiance, which I think is probably harder. It found that about the same number of people who are engaged don't agree on their financial goals with their partner, don't agree on what the goals are, and that a quarter of engaged Americans argue with their partner about money regularly. This is before marriage. Just because I'm kind of a numbers geek, life insurance and wills are usually addressed after marriage with less than 8% talking about them beforehand. So it's definitely a taboo subject with people getting married. And I'll cover this a little later, but I think it's just not the most romantic thing to talk about in the moment. So what good can come out of the discoveries of a prenuptial discussion? And I've already hit on one. It's a disclosure of significant debt. And it's just not unusual for a partner to disclose the full amount of debt that they carry. They can gloss over it, not be specific, until they're required or asked to sign a legal agreement as to this is full disclosure under oath of what I have and what I owe. Agreeing that the debts of a partner coming into the marriage will continue to be their debts if they go out of the marriage can really prevent future emotional and financial conflicts, feelings of betrayal and hurt, if those best intentioned promises to each other fail. And it unfortunately doesn't take a long time or many years for a marriage to fail. So having these agreements right up front can really lay a foundation for trust going forward. Other items that can be covered in a prenuptial of two partners that don't have any current assets can be whether one spouse is going to receive financial support from the other after a divorce, how you're going to treat discrepancies in income. This can be a source of real irritation and separation in a couple that don't have transparent talks about how that potentially feels or things that can happen emotionally with that. Another one would be agreements on personal conduct or spending habits. It is so common that in partnerships there's a partner who's a spender and a partner who's a saver. That I wrote a column on that a few months ago about that's the couple that is going to have friction in their marriage until they learn to play to each other's strengths, because there's not the spender isn't wrong and the saver isn't right, and vice versa. They both are bringing strengths into the marriage that can be capitalized on if they allow the other one to play to their strengths. But it also can completely split them apart. You might think, well, it's best if we both were savers or we both were spenders. Not necessarily. That can mean everything feels really calm in the canoe before you go over the waterfall together. Another one is how inherited assets will be treated. Now, inherited assets are a big item, or can be a big item, that are given very little thought as to the potential division via a marital split. What are we going to do if you get a big inheritance from your family and I don't, or vice versa? Is half of what you get mine? And also this can be further problematic because a lot of partners don't even know if an inheritance is coming. Talking about money is so taboo in many families that most kids have no clue what their parents are worth or how much in the way of an inheritance might be coming their way someday. So unless there is an agreement otherwise, and an agreement when there isn't contention, agreement when logic has more of a chance of being front and center in the thought process as to how you would handle these things if they happen, it can really cause divisiveness and tension and hurt. So that's a question to ask. Would I want my spouse to get half? Probably more importantly, would my parents like my spouse to get half? Again, in the light that we divorce. And many parents anticipate this problem when they do their estate planning. And typically what I see, unless they've been married for a long time and the parents are equally, what do I want to say, supportive of both partners, they typically will leave 100% to their blood child. And this is usually done via a trust. And it is an irrevocable trust to the child. So this means that the child has no say over the trust, has no say who ultimately gets the money when they die from the trust. They don't control it. They typically don't invest it. They just benefit from an income. And there's not always an income coming from a trust like this. Sometimes it can be written that only if there's a big health problem can there be money coming from the trust. So in this case, assets and any income of the trust are not considered an asset of the child that's the beneficiary because they don't own them, they don't control them. And so they're not seen as assets in most states in the U.S. with one big exception. That state's Colorado. And in Colorado, divorce and irrevocable trusts meant to protect a child's assets become a really complex tango compared to other states. Even seemingly straightforward trusts created elsewhere, like in South Dakota, might be intentionally ignored under Colorado law and result in the beneficiary of the trust that has no control over this trust to have a judge give everything owned by the coupleship to the other spouse except the assets of the trust, leaving the partner that has a beneficial interest in the trust basically penniless. There's a Colorado firm, Griffith's law firm, that said, and I quote, "If trusts are at issue in your case, there's absolutely no question that you need to seek legal advice from a very experienced attorney. Do not mess this one up," end quote. So if you're madly in love and have made it this far in this podcast, congratulations. I haven't even addressed the emotional responses of most partners that can result in hearing the word prenup escaping the lips of a partner. While often associated with protecting significant assets, prenups again can benefit any couple, regardless of the income level. The emotional focus of a prenup is usually on fear of a conflict that would arise between them before getting married that could even have the potential for the relationship to end. So usually they're just not talked about. There's typically very little focus on the positive aspects of a prenup that can create a sense of peace and security from having deep, transparent discussions around money. So that would be my recommendation, is to focus on that. Focus on having that deep, difficult discussion around money with the knowledge that out of this can come clarity and security, knowing how finances are going to be managed in your marriage and in the case of a divorce. Again, there's the transparency and communication comes around this. There can be a sense of fairness and protection because both partners can end up feeling protected by ensuring each gets a fair share based on the prenuptial agreements, especially if one has significantly more assets. And the focus can be on love and commitment, because it's love and commitment that will lead a couple into having these deep and challenging discussions on any topic, which includes money. And doing this can really solidify the commitment to each other and prioritize the emotional aspects of the marriage and really eliminate anxieties. So I started by underscoring the idea of exploring whether a prenup is necessary for you and your partner. I didn't say actually having one. You both may decide that a prenup totally isn't needed once you get into this discussion, and that is perfectly okay. The whole point is discussing the potential benefits of a prenup can have one hugely valuable outcome, which is the open discussion regarding personal finances and attitudes about money. And if that is all that happens, the prenup talk has been an outstanding success. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to speaking with you next week. Take care. Thanks for joining me, Rick Kahler, for another episode of Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. This is where I combine the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Remember, every financial behavior, whether it appears illogical to you or others, makes perfect sense when we understand the underlying beliefs, feelings, and thoughts. Sign up for my weekly blog at financialawakenings.com. I hope you'll join me again for our next episode.